You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. One of the earliest things that makes it official for over 16 years and 2,300 episodes of reviewing the Chris Voss Show. And boy, is my back tired from carrying this show for all these years, but we do it as a labor of love and education, and we just love the fact that it enlightens the world and improves so much people. You know, I remember back in 2020, during the COVID crisis, we changed the format of the show to invite all these amazing authors and people on the show, and it was because we decided that we saw a post where it says, you know, in dark times like this, you do one of two things. You either find a lifter or you be a lifter. And we made a decision to be a lifter with the Chris Voss Show and invite amazing people on the show to talk about their lives. And that's what we do. There's some people that are trolls and they tear people down. We try and lift people up. So today we have an amazing author on the show. We'll get into his details. In the meantime, go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss1 on the TikTokity, and all those crazy places on the internet. Opinions expressed by guests on the podcast are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the host or the Chris Voss Show. Some guests of the show may be advertising on the podcast, but it is not an endorsement or review of any kind. Today we have Deepak Parashar on the show with us today. His newest book came out February 2nd, 2024, called Life, the Spiritual Essence, an engineer's insights into the integrated nature of divinity. Welcome to the show, Deepak. How are you?
Thank you, Chris, for having me on. And namaste, and a big namaste to all our friends out there.
Namaste. Did I get your name correct in the edit there?
Deepak Parashar is good.
There we go. You know, you've done a lot of amazing things in your life. You were a seasoned energy industry veteran of over 34 years, extensive experience leading cross-functional teams on global power plant initiatives. You had a chance meeting with the Dalai Lama in 2019, along with two transformational events that sparked 14 years of spiritual research touching 38 countries and how energy connects the existence of all auspices of divinity. So we're going to learn a lot today. So welcome to the show. Give us any .coms. Where do you want people to find you on the interweb, sir?
So, Chris, I'm on primarily on LinkedIn, coming obviously from the energy industry. I also have a handle on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and also on X. Incidentally, I have a doppelganger he's also called Deepak Parashar. He's based in the UK. And we kind of look similar to, if I may, can I just briefly tell you that story?
Sure.
It's a pretty interesting one. It's a very cool story and it's all right. So what happened was that I'd say this goes back to about 2007 or 2008. And my wife was at a party here. And this lady came up to her and said, "Oh, Rina, I didn't know that your husband is a professor." And she said, "What are you talking about? This guy runs around, all across the globe leading these large power initiatives. He doesn't have a time. He's not a." And she says, No, there's a Professor Deepak Parashar, and I found him on the internet. And so my son went and researched, and he sent me the link, and I opened it up, and I see another Deepak Parashar there, and he looks remarkably like me. It was kind of similar. Being the enthusiastic, inquisitive type, I just couldn't let go, Chris. So what I did was, at the time I did not wear glasses, but he wore glasses. So what I did was I took a picture of myself, and I borrowed my wife's glasses, and I sort of tilted my head the way he had his, and I put the two pictures together, and I sent it to him because he's in academia. Yeah, so I found his email. So he writes back. And he says, "This is stunning." And he says, "I sent the picture to my parents in Delhi and they freaked out too." So now as I'm starting to get to know him, he's in the UK, I'm based in the US. And as I'm we got to know each other. We're both the same birth sign, both are Aquarians.
Really?
Yes. And then not only that, we had also frequented the same cities, at the same time. So, for example, when he was based in Swansea, UK, I was going there on a power project, and I had 20 trips and 20 months over there. And we were talking about the same supermarkets that we went to, but we never once connected until this happened. So, it was just such an intriguing story, and you hear about these things, but there it is. When I went to India, I went over to meet his parents, and it was one of those magnificent moments in life, Chris, because what happened was I entered and his father greeted us. My dad had come along with me, and I turned to the right, and his mother was, she was preparing some snacks for us. And Chris, when you see a person like just completely lose all balance, and she fell over the kitchen counter, burst into tears, came over and hugged me, and then she was telling her husband, she says, on a scale of 9 to 10, they are, they're that similar. And moms always know. So finally, I caught up with him, and the other thing was that he was always the academic. He was, and I was the sports guy, martial arts, cricket. I never studied, but when I did, my favorite subject was mathematics. Now he is a PhD in mathematics. He's currently at the Alan Turing Institute at the University of Warwick. And the funny thing was, when I released this book, he sent me a picture, and he had released a book at the same time, right? So I've got Life to Spiritual Lessons up there. And there's another Deepak Parashar with quantum mechanics in there.
Wow.
But that, it was just such a great story. I mean, ultimately, it's a derivative of what we call the interconnected aspects of life. So this was one of those smaller aspects.
That or one of you is adopted.
I took my father along, and he was a corporate guy, very senior corporate man. He only said one word during when he came out. I said, "Dad, what do you think?" And he said, "Interesting." And I had to ask him. I said, "Dad, did one of our relatives, tinker around, and did something happen?" And he says, "No, I don't think so." But Chris, the point was that we couldn't connect. We just couldn't get the links together. But there it was.
Wow.
So ultimately, the long story short is, if you want to find me, type Deepak Parashar and the book Life, the Spiritual Lessons, and you will not run into the other Deepak. That's my point. But be free to run into him too. He's very friendly.
Make sure you get the right one there. So let's get into your book, your book that just came out February. Give us a 30,000 overview of what's inside that new book, Life, the Spiritual Essence.
So this is fundamentally about an engineer's journey, and I'm the engineer who runs around the globe experientially, examining how the substratum of energy, both material and connect all aspects of existence under what I call the corporate umbrella of divinity. Coming from industry, I love that term, the corporate umbrella of divinity. But there were a series of events commencing December of 2008. While I was running around building power plants across the globe and working with team in north of 30 countries, there were 3 events within a 6-month period, commencing December 2008, that sparked the journey. And why don't we discuss the story behind the book a little bit, and then we can develop the discussion.
Let's do that. Tell us what the proponent was that started this journey.
Okay, so the first one was that I picked up a key scripture of Hinduism, and this was sparked by the need for a holistic, timely stress management system. Because, Chris, when you're leading these large initiatives, with cross-functional teams in north of 30 countries, your hours begin to get stretched, and before you know it, you've lost your holistic balance. So typical engineer. This was a book by Swami Chinmayanand. He's one of the great renowned sages of India of the past century. And ultimately, it took me 5 years to read this 1,200-page book. So it was less than a page a day with a lot of derivative studies, to the point that I was beginning to understand the brush strokes of the author. It was very interesting for the first 5-year run. Now, in the meantime, the next event was on around April, early May of 2009. And I was visiting some clients in India, some energy clients. And I had to carry on to Korea for further client meetings. So I boarded this Japan Airlines flight from Delhi to Tokyo, the 12-hour run. And lo and behold, who came and sat across from me was His Holiness, the Dalai Lama of Tibet.
Oh, wow.
And so that, in fact, that was my first meeting. And then I met him a second time in 2019, once I'd done a lot of this research. And the point was that not only did I have a perfect view of him for 12 hours on the flight, but in the morning, just an hour before we landed in Tokyo, he kind of encouraged me over, and I got his blessings. And yes, it was remarkable. So the next event after that was just a couple of months later. And this time I'm in Istanbul, Turkey, again on a power project. And I ran into a United States Vietnam veteran, U.S. Marine Corps. And, Chris, you can just tell, by the crew cuts and the taut body language, that you see in people in the armed forces the world over. But there was something more about this guy, and I said, let me get to know him a little bit better. So I did. And before you know it, I noticed that he was exhibiting some powers that one would typically associate with our traditional holy men and women the world over, or as a minimum, people, you hear about stories about these great martial arts practitioners in the Far East, like Silhat or Qigong, where through the powers of the mind, they can transmute subtle energies into a material force. And this experience with them was very tangible. And that sparked the engineer up in me. And so when I sat back and when I thought about the three events that had taken place, picking up running into His Holiness, and then, and then here's this Vietnam veteran who was shooting some energy at me. I had this intuition that these three events are somehow interlinked. And they were also experiential in nature. Chris, it's one thing, you hear about, you're watching a TV program and, there's His Holiness. I mean, there he is, 15 feet away from you for 12 hours and you get his blessings. And next thing you've got a Vietnam veteran shooting energy at you. So at this point, a mandate got formed in my mind that I was going to go and sort this out. There was something going on. They were experiential in nature. And the word divinity seemed to emanate from each of the events.
Oh, wow.
And at this point, Chris, looking back on it, it was almost like a lid got blown off my mind. And if there were any cuffs or any reservations that I had, they came off. And I tell you, Chris, in retrospect, when you have a basic humility and a gratefulness for what you have, and you couple that with extraordinary situational awareness, and this is a very fine art, because when you're running in projects that deal in multi-billions, you have to be on top of it all the time. Time is money, profit equals cash. You're always on the go. There's just no stopping. So you have to have this awareness about you. And when you take these three elements and you reinforce it with a natural curiosity, the universe suddenly opens up some very, very unique corridors of wisdom. And so at this point, that sparked my journey. And I said, and for the next 14 years, it was actually 12 years of act search, and then somewhere between 2 to 3 years of, collecting all the insights leading up into the book. But, I had this massive info coming at me, nature, people, places, cultures, science and spirituality, metaphysics, 15 religions, philosophies, you name it. It was all coming at me, and I had to sort this out, delineate the information, and put it into something that I could understand.
Yeah. And so you did that in the book.
Yes, that's what led ultimately into the book. But it basically just started out as a dossier of information, because I was so intrigued, with what was going on. And ultimately, when I look back on it, on top of working 70, 80 hours a week, I actually began to clean up my act. And I actually added on probably somewhere between 25 to 30 additional hours a week of just where I was doing pure research, while, but experientially once again. And so some examples of the travels, Chris, whether I was in downtown Montevideo in Uruguay, in Latin America, and I ran smack into the Uruguay Carnival, just like the Brazilian one that they do in Rio. But here I am, milling around amongst the dancers, and they're getting ready, and you're seeing the rhythm of these people. And, in fact, later on, I found that dance and rhythm and music are considered divine arts in various multiple philosophies, across the globe. So, you're carrying on and then on into the cacao farms of Ecuador, where you're now seeing chocolate at the pod level. And, and I met families, like 30 of them, where they were thriving in nature. And it's really interesting that the gentleman who took me around, he said that people here live up onto the age of 100. And I think that's the point, because they imbibe the beauty of nature within them. And I'd heard similar stories, like in the fishing villages of Japan. And then carrying on, into the plains, into the Atacama Desert, where they're done testing for the Mars rover missions, and we went into the observatories at night, and you're seeing the star clusters of the Magellan clouds and the moons of Jupiter. And then on into some I visited the beaches of Normandy because I'm also a history buff. I did a lot of research on World War II. So I went down to Omaha Beach and then, walked through the American Memorial to see, because I wanted to see what it was like, that quarter mile of beachhead. And one of the questions that came up is how do generals take decisions? Because they knew that the first waves had no chance, when they as they came in. And part of the research was also about looking at leadership in multiple industries. I was, obviously very interested in that. And later on, I met a colonel. I was attending a session at West Point, and I asked this Marine colonel that, how do you justify it? And he said, look, it's very simple. We send the officers in with the troops. And, so this was, that's when I remembered that General Norman Cota was on the beaches. And, these are principles of leadership that you're learning firsthand. And then, went on to very challenging locations like Auschwitz or Birkenau. I visited Dachau concentration camp because, it's one thing to travel to multiple points or to, multiple holistic and religious and spiritual establishments, but it's something, where was the divinity in these places, and that's what I wanted to go see. So they were, very challenging. And then on, carrying on into, I even visited the Cu Chi tunnels of Vietnam, which was another experience unto itself.
Wow. So you did a lot of travels. What is divinity? How do you define that? What does that mean exactly?
Divinity is where you begin to, first of all, recognize that you are the essence of an energetic connected system in increasing layers of purity, guided by some form of divine intelligence. And that's basically how the great sages, this is what they've come to understand. And they're able to, through certain meditative and certain, how to say, concentration and meditation, they can ultimately take, the divinity from our basic level. They're able to control energies and able to transmute their body into what they call a light phenomenon, to be able to get from the material plane into the subtler, and then on into what they call the causal, eventually getting to the highest levels, even to the point that they can come back to, to help others at will.
So you talk in the book about several different things. Let's pull this up that I wanted to discuss. You talk about the 6 triggers of holistic daily stuff. Tell us about what those trigger points are, the 6 trigger points.
Yes. Before that, Chris, let me tell you about some of, and I'll work right into the 6 trigger points. But let me tell you a little bit about the people that showed up to help. Mm-hmm. So during the course of the 14 years, I would estimate that probably north of 100 people showed up, from the extraordinarily poor to the, to the affluent, to leaders, people from all walks of life. And this is one of those things that when, don't ever be shy to ask people for help. So whether it was through planned or chance encounters, the help was always available. Specifically on the 6 trigger points, actually, it's great that you brought that up. I had done a lot of research, over 7 years of testing and then 7 years of trials, basically from all the research that I put together, I'd come up with what you call a holistic energetic chart for daily improvement. And the way it works is I split the mind up into 6 action-oriented quadrants. And what I do, it's about 25 cumulative points. And I measure myself every single day on how I did the previous day against each of these points. And the beauty of it is it's not just the individual points, but it's also the combination of these of how they work. So the 6 triggers, just for the listeners, the first box is about how at any given time you're always pointing towards purity as opposed to dullness in your life. This is your fundamental daily challenge. The next box is all about how you transform work into worship. So, for example, if you look at the tennis star Roger Federer, look at, this is a warrior monk in action, right? How he's able to, his deadly focus. The third box is all about an inner silence or dynamic quietude. How do you maintain that any given moment? And the point is that, if you look at people or if you look at the special forces, you see how they've quietened down their dynamic energy to operate in the most efficient manner. Then the next box is all about the interconnectedness of life. So even a simple example of that, Chris, is if you once start saying to yourself that, look, we are all part of a larger interconnected system in play. What happens is you stop being jealous. You start to actually cheer for the success of others. And then as you get on into the higher echelons of what I call the eye of wisdom, where you are now a very dynamic, cheerful force to be reckoned with, and then you progressively begin to understand how to transcend your personal fears. So that's how the 6 box chart works. Now, what happened was, I was watching a program called Executing Evil, the Ben Ferencz story. And it was on Netflix. This was about a Nuremberg special trials prosecutor. And Chris, as I was seeing the program, I realized that everything I'd done relative to the 6 trigger, to this holistic first section of the book, this man embellished it. He was just talking, and it was the simplicity of thought and the courage and the leadership. And I said, I got to go reach out to him. So I tried to find him on the web. And before you know it, 3 days later, the phone rings. And it's the last surviving prosecutor of the Nuremberg trials on the other end of the line.
Wow.
And it was I rate that possibly in my top 3 discussions globally in all my travels. And he was telling me about, and I told him, I said, sir, all the research I did in the first section of the book, how do you embellish it? What do you do? And he started to just tell me about his principles in life and, how he faced all odds. He went into the concentration camps as they were being rescued. And then he was telling me about his strategic vision, and how we have a vision. He called it strategic vision. So he was collecting evidence for the trials to bring down the head of the Einsatzgruppen. And what he said was, he didn't quote Hitler. He went for records of people eliminated. And so he said, when I got to 1 million people, I stopped. Jesus. And so it was those kind of, the help that I was beginning to receive. And then, there were a lot of other, because the book in totality, I think this is probably a good time just to tell you. So the first part is the holistic section of the book, right? The 6 triggers. The next one talks about the involution and the evolution of the universe from the viewpoint of Hinduism. The third is a structural analysis of the world's 5 major religions. And this, in fact, this was a very cool story, because what happened was, when I initially, Chris, as an engineer, I thought, okay, I'll create one of those white papers, maybe have a 3-page, little chart, with the 5 religions laid across and stuff. But as I started to research each one, there was a fair amount of, complexity. It needed a lot of study. So I was struggling with Judaism and Buddhism. And I remember I had to fly to Chile that morning. And I said, when I come back from Santiago, I'm going to go back out into the community and find a rabbi and a monk. So I get on this flight and I changed planes at DC. And a rabbi came and sat next to me. and a high Buddhist scholar came and sat behind. And we worked together for the next 4 years to develop that 3-pager turned into something like 140 pages.
Oh, wow.
On how, but it's a structural analysis of, it's not a comparison. It's an iterative science in the vision behind each of the religions. So basically, I worked with clerics and high scholars to put this section of the book together. Then the next section, having gone through a lot, and there were a lot of other leaders that sent me information for the book. Like for example, Dr. Musgrave, he was a key member of the team that fixed the Hubble telescope. So he sent me some stuff for the book. The Tuskegee Airman, Colonel James Harvey, he sent me some stuff for the book. And all these meetings were taking place in real time while all this global research was being taken place.
Wow.
Yes. And then Chris, stop me anytime because I'm very passionate about, the search for knowledge. Do you have a question or should I keep?
Yeah, we got into the 6 things. There were some other aspects of the book that I wanted to we just want to tease this out so that people will pick up the book. You've got the 6 trigger points, and then in the book you've got over 65 illustrations and pictures that talk about this. You talk about your spiritual travel log, and I guess that's what we've been kind of talking about, some of the journeys you've taken and some of the things that you've done. What else in the book haven't we teased out to people that maybe they can check out?
Yes. So as you said, you got the holistic, you've got involution and evolution of the universe, which is very similar to the Big Bang Theory. I was running into the parallels and quantum mechanics, and there was a lot going on, from a technical viewpoint. And then there's the structural religious analysis. The last section of the book is the spiritual travel log, which, where I put in 22 specific examples of how the engineer translates philosophical principles into spiritual reality. And then the other section in the book, Chris, is having researched all this info, I said, okay, let me see if I can put together a model, an energy model of how all of this comes together. Now, given all the experiences of, some of these subtle experiences, the Vietnam veteran shooting energy, you're meeting people, and later on I stumbled into principles like what they call the law of manifestation, the law of attraction. These were all happening. And I was forced to conclude that, there is something to these principles. What was beginning to emerge is that we're really looking at a giant interconnected system of material and subtle energies that work in congruence in increasing layers of purity guided by celestial intelligence. But what I did was, with the energy model, I said, let me sit down and see, based upon all this research of, X number of years, how do I create a model with the least amount of, let's say, leaps into belief? Let's see if I can come up with a model. So I picked some boundary conditions and I started the entire, and so that deals with how we begin as confused people. We then turn ourselves into warriors. We go from warriors to warrior monks, and then we translate ourselves into monks. And then ultimately, you're able to, at will, you're able to transcend, the material subtle planes into the subtle and subtle. And as I mentioned, you get a lot of cases of, a lot of these monks and swamis and sages coming back to help others. So I was able to put this model together, which was actually a lot of fun, commencing from the basic person. And again, it deals with how the human being has to, first of all, recognize that we are the essence of divinity. It's sitting at our core. And then you begin the process of mental house cleaning. That's where the 6 trigger points, the holistic section comes in. And then you go into progressive layers of concentration and meditative techniques, as you begin to grow within, the realms of consciousness. And that's the entire book in totality.
So do you do anything else? Do you do any consulting or any coaching, any advising on how to, if you're trying to utilize the book, how to utilize it better? Do you do any personal help that way?
Yes. In fact, what happened, Chris, is I released the book in Feb, but then I had to put everything aside because my father passed away. And so I had to go. So I had to take a hiatus of about 6 months. So I've just commenced the run now into the market, and I also do some consulting in energy on the side. But we'll see where this journey takes us. My personal read is that the book itself is a segue into something larger, and I've dedicated the book proceeds for poor children. it's time for me to give back. I'm very grateful for all the lessons learned.
As we go out, give people a final pitch out. How can they onboard with you, get to know you better, .coms, all that good stuff?
So I'm very easily, reachable through LinkedIn and through the multiple channels that we've set up. And that's the best way to get hold of me.
It's been fun to have you on the show. Very insightful, and wow, what an honor to meet the Dalai Lama. That's just amazing. I don't think a lot of people get to meet him or shake hands with him.
No, he actually, the way they do it is that he blesses you. And I was fortunate to have the 2 meetings with him, but it's the inner child in him that comes through at any given time. Of course, these monks, they are so superbly trained, but they hide it under that bubbly cloak of humor.
Yeah.
But it was a wonderful experience. It's one of the I mean, his radiance is such, and you can see that he genuinely loves everybody.
Yeah.
And it's not very often you meet people like that in your life. So I was very fortunate to have done that.
Lots of great leadership there. So thank you for coming on the show. Folks, order up the book wherever fine books are sold. Excuse me. Life, the Essence. We got to having a little voice there. Life, the Spiritual Essence, an engineer's insights into the integrated nature of divinity, out February 2nd, 2024. Order it wherever fine books are sold. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss. Chris Voss won the TikTok and all those crazy places on the internet. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.